Hey, this is what I get for making you the manager since you recently took over. I excused it last month, but this month's stats are similarly lower than they were the previous year. What would happen if you performed poorly for 2 consecutive months? The chief of the division, Michael, told me this. I apologize. We've lost a lot of customers to Newcastle Electronics since they opened 2 months ago, I stated, because their store is closer to the station. Michael answered, I am aware of that. Why are there so many excuses? Incompetence is worthless. Because of this, a drawback of the store I oversaw was its distance from the station. Additionally, Castle Electronics had been heavily advertising, and our store was smaller. It felt unjust to place all the blame on me because, of course, this was something the organization needed to solve. Section Chief Daniel stepped in to help me. That's unjust. Michael James has no influence over the problems his store is facing. Castle Electronics' extensive advertising isn't helping, and the location is a drawback. Michael, however, brushed him off. Are you all attempting to shift your accountability to the business? What are your pay and title for? The management is solely to blame for the store's bad performance. It indicates that you lack competence. I reasoned that if such were the case, the division head would be held accountable for the division's general performance. However, I was unable to express that aloud. Additionally, we had underpaid overtime at a very low income at our company. I didn't understand Michael's reasoning. It seemed unconvincing to be told to put in a lot of effort for very little money. Would it be simpler if I simply accepted it and believed that I only needed to put in more effort? Is it improper for a paid worker to ask their employer questions? I was thinking about these things when I heard something startling. There's no need for you to come in tomorrow, James. You've been fired. For a second, I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Michael's statement caused the other store managers in the room to freeze. Daniel made another attempt to step in. That's too much, Michael. Come on, let's stop there. Since James is aware that he needs to raise the figures. What are you talking about, Daniel? Michael said icily. I don't make jokes. James has been dismissed as of right now. You better increase your numbers, the rest of you, if you don't want to suffer the same destiny. The managers' meeting ended there. Michael walked out of the room. I'm James, and I'm 35. I had spent 10 years working for TKD Electronics, a significant retailer of electronics. I worked as a part-time job for a long time after being hired as a full-time employee because I only completed a technical school just 2 years ago. I was able to secure a full-time position. Since I was a student, I have been an introvert who would rather discuss common interests with a select group of pals than interact with the entire class. I decided to go to technical school for programming rather than university since I felt that I wasn't cut out for occupations that required a lot of communication skills. After graduating, I searched for positions in system management and development because I enjoyed working alone on a computer. I eventually came across a job advertised by my current employer. I was informed during the interview that it was a hands-on company. I began working as a retail employee after getting employed. I was informed that I would be transferred to an appropriate department once I had gained practical experience. I anticipated working in the store for a year or so before transferring to the assistant department. But after 2 and then 3 years, I was still working at the business. Furthermore, there was no indication of promotion from part-time to full-time status for 2 then 3 years. That state of affairs persisted. My supervisors ignored my frequent requests for a transfer amid contract renewals. One could conclude after hearing the story that I ought to have changed careers sooner. However, I had a rationale for continuing for 10 years. I had to deal with customers at the business, which made my communication difficulties better. You had to utilize your conversational abilities to persuade the person in front of you to purchase the product in a workplace with intimidating elders where sales figures were crucial. Individual sales goals were set, and not meeting them resulted in reprimands. I couldn't sell anything on my own at first, but I improved over time with practice. Being able to sell indicated that my speaking abilities had improved. By my second and third years, thanks to my job, I could now talk to various types of people, unlike in my private life where I struggled with conversations beyond close friends. I even ran into an old classmate in town who remarked, "James, you've become more outgoing." So I decided to work hard at my job until I could transfer to a system-related department where I excelled. 2 years ago, I finally got promoted to store manager. I should have been happy, especially since I became a full-time employee. But I was also anxious. Initially, I was assigned to a store with a good location and easy sales. Both the section chief and division head were reliable mentors, so I worked hard with a sense of purpose. But things went downhill when I was transferred to my current store. The store was far from the station, in a bad location, and a new Castle Electronics store had just opened near the station. As a result, we lost even more customers to them, making it a challenging store for me to manage as the new manager. Despite the challenges, we worked together to try various strategies to boost sales. However, there were limits to what I could do as a store manager, and it was difficult to come up with strategies that could turn things around under such unfavorable conditions. "James, it's a tough store, but let's do our best together." Daniel, whom I trusted, always encouraged me. I motivated myself to work hard every day. The division head, David, was also someone I trusted, like Daniel, but my luck ran out when he was replaced at this critical time. A new division head, Michael, who was 5 years older than me, took over, and suddenly the pressure on me increased dramatically. "Other store managers are working hard, so what are you doing? Do you even realize you're in charge of a store? Oh, and I heard you didn't go to college. No wonder you can't get the numbers. That's why technical school grads are useless," Michael would say to me at every opportunity. He would make these remarks in front of my juniors. Some sympathized with me, saying, "Michael is really harsh," while others gossiped, "Did you know James only went to a technical school?" Daniel knew how tough Michael was on me and often encouraged me. However, Michael outranked him, so there were many things Daniel couldn't do to help. I tried to keep myself motivated, but the numbers at a store with such poor conditions didn't improve quickly. 2 months after being transferred to the current store, I attended the monthly manager meeting at the head office conference room, feeling gloomy. I thought about how this month's sales were far from the target. I was certain I would be scolded by the division head. I opened the door to the conference room. I had arrived very early, so no one else was there yet. I took my designated seat and waited for the other store managers, Daniel and Michael, to arrive. Once everyone, including Daniel, was present, it was time for the meeting to start. Under Michael's leadership, the meeting involved each manager standing up in turn to report their sales and issues, receiving feedback on the spot. When Michael entered the room, everyone stood up quickly, and the meeting began under a tense atmosphere. Each store manager reported their monthly sales in turn. Since we were going in seating order, my turn was last. After listening to everyone else's reports, it was finally my turn. Fully aware that my numbers were nothing to be proud of, I had no choice but to report the facts. I read out the figures for the month. As soon as I started speaking, Michael shouted, "Hey, I made you the manager, and this is what I get. Last month, I let it slide because you just took over, but this month's numbers are also down compared to last year. Do you know what happens if your performance is worse for 2 months in a row?" Everyone in the room went silent, barely daring to breathe. "I'm sorry. The Newcastle Electronics store opened 2 months ago, and it's closer to the station, so we've lost a lot of customers to them," I explained. Michael responded, "I know that. What's with the excuses? This is why incompetence is useless." Daniel came to my aid, saying, "The store James is managing is far from the station, which is a disadvantage. Our store is also smaller, and Castle Electronics has been advertising aggressively. Of course, we need to address this as a company, so putting all the responsibility on James is unfair. Michael dismissed him, snapping, "Are you guys trying to pass off your responsibilities onto the company? What's the point of your title and salary? The store's poor performance is entirely the manager's responsibility. It means you're incompetent." I thought to myself, if that's the case, then the overall poor performance of the division is the division head's responsibility, right? But I couldn't say that out loud. Our company's salary was quite low, and we had unpaid overtime. His arguments didn't make sense to me because being told to work hard for such low pay was not convincing. Would it be easier if I just accepted it and told myself that I needed to work harder? Is it wrong for a salaried employee to question their boss? While I was mulling over these thoughts, I heard something shocking. "So, James, you don't need to come in tomorrow. You're fired." I couldn't believe my ears for a moment. I could feel the other store managers in the room freezing up as well. Michael's words hung in the air like a heavy cloud. Daniel tried to intervene again. "Come on, Michael, that's too much. James understands he needs to improve the numbers, so let's leave it at that." Michael replied, "What are you talking about? I never joke. James is fired as of today. The rest of you, if you don't want the same fate, you'd better raise your numbers. That's the end of the manager's meeting." He left the room. Some people looked at me with pity, while others pretended not to notice. The atmosphere was awful. "James, don't worry. I'll talk to Michael later. Everyone knows it's not your fault," Daniel said, patting me on the shoulder. I appreciated the encouragement, but I thought Michael might actually fire me, and there were limits to what Daniel could do. That day, I had to go back to my store and work, but it was hard to keep a positive attitude and smile while serving customers. The next day was my day off. The store is open year-round, so we work on a shift basis. On my days off, the assistant manager and other staff handled the store. But as the manager, I'd always have a mountain of tasks to do. I often dropped by the store even on my days off. However, after the emotional blow from the previous day's manager meeting, I decided to take a proper break and relax at home. A notification sound from my phone indicated a new message. It was from John, the assistant manager. Checking the message, I saw this: "A new manager has arrived at the store today, but I wasn't informed beforehand, and I'm confused. I heard you've resigned. Is that true?" Lying down and looking at my phone, I was so shocked that I jumped up and shouted, "What?" in my empty house. I hurried to call John, but then thought he might not be able to talk during work, so I replied via message, "I haven't heard anything about that. Can you call me after work?" I sent the message to John and immediately called the company. I didn't know who would answer, but it was likely to be Daniel or Michael. "Hello, TKT Electronics," Michael's voice answered. Recognizing him, I quickly spoke over him. "Michael, were you serious about what you said yesterday, that I'm fired?" He laughed. "Oh, it's you, James. Did you think I was joking? How naive. You really thought you could stay with those numbers? Someone as useless as you isn't employable anywhere. Go find another part-time job if you can." This couldn't be happening. I was at a loss, but refusing to be defeated, I quickly thought and said, "Michael, please give me another chance. I'll increase sales." "Another chance? How long do you need? Your chance is over. I was lenient your first month, wasn't I? But you blew it this month, too. Goodbye. You need to sign your resignation papers by tomorrow. It's an order from the division head." He refused to listen and hung up. Realizing it was pointless to argue, I had no choice but to hang up. The next day, still unable to fully believe it, I went to the company. Michael had the resignation papers ready, and I was made to sign them. Daniel, looking apologetic, said quietly, "I'm sorry I couldn't protect you, James. This is my failure, too." "It's not your fault, Daniel. I couldn't deliver either," I replied before packing up my desk and leaving the company. Outside, I looked up at the sky. I had worked so hard for 10 years, never expecting to leave so abruptly. I recalled the previous night, after the store closed at 9 p.m. John called me. "I'm sorry for calling late. We just finished closing the store," John said, out of breath. "Thanks for calling, even though you're busy," I replied, thanking him. He began to explain just how tough the day had been. When I came in for my late shift, there was a stranger at the register. When I asked Emily, who was on the early shift, she said he was the new manager. I was surprised, but I thought it was a sudden personnel change, and you hadn't had time to inform me. Then Michael came and said, "James has resigned, so we need to follow the new manager's orders." John continued, clearly upset. Then the new manager started changing the store layout, making it difficult for customers and us to find products. After causing a mess, he told us to put everything back the way it was. Now we have to clean up on our own, and we don't know when we'll finish. I was shocked by John's account. That's unbelievable. He just left after making a mess. "Yes, he left after causing chaos," John replied. "Then he said we couldn't lob overtime and should mark it as leaving on time. When I was stunned, he said, 'With such poor sales, we can't afford extra labor costs. You understand that as the assistant manager, right?' I don't think I can work with this new manager," John lamented. I felt a sense of crisis, realizing things were really going wrong. However, having been fired, I felt helpless and unable to do anything about it. I told John that being fired at the manager's meeting wasn't my decision, and that he could always talk to me if he had any problems. "Life is tough," I muttered to myself, looking up at the sky as an unemployed man. But I couldn't keep dwelling on it forever. I had worked hard for 10 years at TKD Electronics, but the world was bigger than this. With nothing left to lose, I decided it was time to start something new. I shifted my mindset and began thinking about what to do next. Returning home, I calmed down and realized I needed to find a job. I opened my computer and started looking into job sites. Though it had been a while since I last searched for a job, I found the variety of job types had changed a lot since my student days. It was interesting. I reminisced about my student days when I was looking for jobs in system management and development. Never did I imagine I'd be working in retail for so long. Life is truly unpredictable. As I scrolled through the job listings on the site, one ad caught my eye: Castle Electronics Corporation. It was TKD Electronics' rival and arguably the reason I got fired. If Castle Electronics hadn't opened near my store, our sales wouldn't have dropped so much, and I wouldn't have been scolded by the division head. How interesting fate is. Before I knew it, I found myself applying for a position at Castle Electronics. The next day, I received a call from Castle Electronics' HR department. They scheduled an interview, so at least I wasn't being outright rejected. On the day of the interview, I dressed in a suit, feeling somewhat indifferent, thinking I'd probably be rejected anyway. Sure, having experience in the same industry might help, but TKD Electronics was significantly smaller and less reputable compared to Castle Electronics. I figured the interviewers would probably just look down on me. Castle Electronics is a rapidly growing company, popular among the younger generation. Most of the interviewees were in their 20s. Having worked at TKD Electronics for 10 years, I found myself in my mid-30s, almost 40, facing this harsh reality. The fresh young faces looking to switch jobs after gaining 3 years of experience somewhere else were dazzling. So dazzling that I jokingly thought I should have brought sunglasses. I waited in the hallway for my turn. "Next, please," I heard, and entered the room. The interviewer was a woman. I introduced myself, bowed, and sat down when she gestured for me to do so. She asked the usual questions about my education, and I answered them. Next, she would undoubtedly ask about my work history and the reason for leaving my last job. I was nervous. Admitting I was fired for poor sales performance as a manager would be the worst possible explanation. Should I lie? No, I had to be honest. While I was contemplating this, the interviewer asked a surprising question. James, what do you value most in life? Caught off guard, I hesitated but replied, well, I want to do what I'm good at, earn a living from it, and enjoy my life. I realized halfway through that it wasn't the right answer for an interview. I should have highlighted what I could bring to the company. For example, I could have said that while I didn't hit the sales numbers, I was a trusted team leader. No, that wouldn't have been much of an appeal either. Then the interviewer asked, what are you good at, James? This seemed more like a typical interview question. How should I answer, given my extensive experience in customer service at TKD Electronics, and considering this was an interview with Castle Electronics? I decided to highlight my skills in the electronics retail industry. I have achieved top individual sales in my area. I have extensive experience in customer service. I answered honestly, since it wasn't a lie. The interviewer then asked, what are you good at or passionate about outside of the skills you've developed at work? After thinking for a while, I replied, well, I like programming. I went to a technical school to develop my skills, so I enjoy working on computers, and I'm good at programming. She nodded and said, I see. Thank you for your time today, abruptly ending the interview. I said, thank you, and left the room, letting out a sigh. I was sure I had failed. I knew from the start that there was no way I would get the job, but I still went to the interview because I had a tiny bit of hope. I felt completely crushed. My interview felt shorter than the others, almost like I was being dismissed outright. Exhausted, I decided to start job hunting with renewed vigor. The next day, I registered with a recruitment agency and set up a meeting. Failures make me stronger. To reflect on my failure at the Castle Electronics interview, I watched videos and read books about interview techniques. As night fell and I took a break, my phone rang. Seeing an unknown number, I cautiously answered. A woman's voice said, "This is Jessica from Castle Electronics." I was so surprised that I jumped up from my chair. "Thank you for coming in for an interview yesterday. Regarding the result, so this company even calls those who didn't make it. What a courteous and nice company," I thought. "It's really too bad I won't get to work there." As I was lost in thought, the woman continued, "We would like to offer the position. Can you come in tomorrow?" "Did you say I got the job?" I instinctively asked for confirmation. "Yes," she replied in a clear, cheerful voice. "Can you start working right away? Your annual salary will be $200,000. What? Life is interesting because you never know what will happen. And so a year passed since that event. I was having dinner after work with John, the previous assistant manager from TKT Electronics, and Daniel, who used to be a section chief. "It's been a long time. I'm glad to see you both doing well," I said. "After a long time apart, John, you took over your family's farm, right? You look a bit tanned but healthy," Daniel added. John, who had left the company before Daniel, replied, "Both of us had gotten fed up with TKD Electronics' ways and quit shortly after you did. Daniel now works for another major company. That company was none other than Castle Electronics Corporation, where I currently work. You guys are amazing, earning $100,000 a year, while I'm struggling with the hard work on the farm," John said. "Well, it's not physically hard since I have the stamina, but this summer's drought made it tough to grow crops. Then the hurricane damaged the vegetables that had grown. But all in all, things are going well. Most importantly, I enjoy the work." John shared his recent experiences. "John, when James invited you to Castle Electronics, you said, 'I'm done with corporate jobs.' That was a bold move," Daniel said. "I, on the other hand, immediately said, 'I'm in,'" Daniel added with a laugh. "By the way, James isn't just a $100,000 earner. He makes $200,000 a year," Daniel said with a grin. "That's right," I confirmed. After getting hired at Castle Electronics, I headhunted John and Daniel, who had tough times at TKD Electronics. John declined, but Daniel now works with me as a colleague. I had that authority because Castle Electronics is a meritocracy that values ability over educational background or years of service. James, you knew the competition was tough when you applied to Castle Electronics, right? What do you think led to your success? John asked. I hadn't told them this story yet. During the interview, I was sure I'd failed, but then I got a call saying I was hired and started the next day. On my first day, I had time to talk with the president and the interviewer, and I learned an amazing fact. John leaned forward, eager to hear more. An amazing fact. It turns out that Jessica, the woman who interviewed me, was a year ahead of me at the technical school I attended. I didn't know her, but I was somewhat famous for my good grades, so she knew of me. Coincidentally, she had bought appliances from me at TKD Electronics and remembered my good customer service. I explained. John reacted with excitement. Wow, that's an incredible coincidence. So Jessica had a very positive impression of you both in school and as a salesperson? That's essentially correct, I replied, though I felt awkward. Yeah, isn't that impressive? Daniel, who knew the full details, stepped in to help. Exactly, and even more surprising, Jessica is the daughter of Castle Electronics president. The president's daughter? John exclaimed. Yes, I confirmed. So, James, you were highly regarded by her, and that's why the president immediately decided to hire you. Daniel summarized. Jessica knew James had high-level IT skills from school and saw how well he handled customers at TKT Electronics, drawing out their needs and explaining products clearly. She'd also noticed how respected he was as a manager. She thought highly of his professional and personal qualities, Daniel explained. She also knew about TKD Electronics' reputation as a tough workplace, so she didn't need to ask why he left. She assumed that if he was let go, it was the company's fault. That's why she offered to consider other talented employees from TKD Electronics if James recommended them, which is how she reached out to us. Daniel turned to me. You've also been studying on your own and have high IT skills, but I didn't know Jessica thought so highly of you. When did you two discuss this? Daniel smiled and replied, Jessica likes you a lot, so she often asks me about your time at TKD Electronics. We talk about you a lot. Please don't tell her any weird stories, okay? I said with an embarrassed smile. Of course not. I only tell her good things. Besides, Jessica is so fond of you that if I said anything bad, she'd be mad at me, Daniel said with a grin. John chimed in with a grin. So does that mean the daughter of the president likes you, James? Embarrassed, I stood up and exclaimed, No way! Someone like me, an introverted nobody, being liked by a beautiful and capable woman like Jessica. That's impossible. Daniel laughed and said, James, I didn't know you back in your student days. Maybe you were just a self-proclaimed introvert, staring at a computer, but that's not who you are now. You're definitely a capable guy with high customer service and IT skills. You're a thoughtful person. If I were a woman, I'd be head over heels for you. Even as a man, I'd admire you a lot as a colleague and a friend. I was stunned. Having never been spoken to like this before, I had no words to respond. Jayan added, I agree. I think you're a very capable guy, James, and I really admire you. When I was the assistant manager, you supported me a lot. Even after you were suddenly fired, you kept in touch and supported me, listening to my complaints about the new manager. Without your support, I might have been crushed under the new manager. I can't thank you enough. Feeling flustered, I said, Please stop. You're making me embarrassed. But deep down, I felt a warm sense of appreciation, and as an adult, I was almost moved to tears. John said, It became clear how competent James was right after he left TKD Electronics. The new manager was overbearing, arrogant, and clueless, causing sales to plummet. This manager was headhunted by Michael to turn things around, but when it failed, Williams, the president of TKD Electronics, blamed Michael and eventually fired him. The company's debt ballooned, and with competent employees leaving, bankruptcy seemed inevitable. Jayan nodded and said, "Yeah, we were lucky to get out before being caught in the fire." Daniel replied, "Exactly. And now both of you are utilizing your customer service and store management skills from TKD Electronics, along with your high IT skills, to handle both internal systems and store operations at Castle Electronics. You've become key players in a major company, earning high salaries, and Castle Electronics' performance is soaring. I'm proud of my former senior's success." John chuckled and said, "You're flattering us too much, Daniel. Are you trying to butter us up so we'll treat you to dinner?" Daniel laughed. "Oops, you caught me." He playfully added, "But we had planned to treat you to dinner from the start." Jokes aside, it was clear that John genuinely admired and respected us. I have always prided myself on working diligently on whatever task was in front of me. Sometimes it's unclear if that hard work will pay off, but moments like this show that it can. Relationships built purely on self-interest are fragile and can quickly fall apart. However, trust that has been built over time is much more resilient. Reconnecting with these valued friends is a treasure to me. I looked at the two people in front of me and thought of Jessica. These precious connections. "Thank you," I murmured.